August 19th, 1942 does 03 hours. The English Channel. The water is deceptively quiet, but under the cover of a moonless night, a steel armada is slicing through the waves. Inside the flat-bottomed boats, the air is thick with diesel fumes, damp wool and fear. These are the men of the Royal Regiment of Canada, the South Saskatchewan Regiment, the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders. For 2 years, they have been garrisoned in England, drinking warm beer in pubs, running drills across the hills of Sussex, watching the war from the sidelines. They are young, they are untested, and they are agonizingly eager. They believe they are the vanguard of liberation. They do not know that they are sailing into a trap. To understand the catastrophe about to unfold, we have to look at the map of the world in 1942. The Third Reich is at its zenith, from the fjords of Norway to the burning sands of North Africa. In the east, the German war machine is tearing into the Soviet Union. Stalin is screaming at Churchill, demanding a second front to stop the bleeding. The Allied High Command is suffocating. They need a victory, and they need it now. Enter Vice Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten. His plan is bold, audacious, and in hindsight, suicidal. The objective? Seize a major fortified port. Hold it for a single tide. Smash the facilities and get out. But the plan is riddled with hubris. They have stripped the operation of heavy naval bombardment. They are relying entirely on surprise, and they have missed one fatal detail. The beach at Dieppe isn't sand, it is chert. A stone that acts like ball bearings under a tank track. 0347. The Armada is nearing the point of no return. Then, pure, unadulterated bad luck. A group of landing craft runs straight into a German convoy. A chance encounter in the vastness of the sea. The night is ripped apart by star shells. The element of surprise is shattered. On the cliffs, the Wehrmacht wakes up. Telephones ring. Machine gun covers are stripped off. They are waiting. To the Canadians, the white cliffs look like home. But these cliffs are not home. They are kill zones. The ramp drops. The explodes. 0520 hours. The moment the ramps hit the stones, the concept of strategy evaporates. There is no cover. There is no surprise. There is only the fire zone on the eastern flank at a narrow beach codenamed Blue. The Royal Regiment of Canada is tasked with neutralizing the artillery batteries overlooking the main harbor. But they are 20 minutes late. The smoke screens laid by the Navy have already lifted. The sun has risen, and the German defenders on the cliffs have a clear, illuminated view of the incoming boats. It is not a battle. It is an execution. The Royals hit the beach and are instantly pinned against a 12-foot seawall. Above them, the cliffs are vertical. Concrete bunkers are carved into the rock face, dropping grenades directly onto the men huddled below. Within 10 minutes, the Royal Regiment effectively ceases to exist. Of the 554 men who land at Blue Beach, over 200 are killed instantly. The rest are wounded or captured. The eastern flank has collapsed. The artillery batteries are still active, and now they turn their guns toward the main event. In the center, directly in front of the town of Dieppe, the Essex Scottish and the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry are racing toward the main promenade. The plan relies on the tanks. The Calgary Regiment's Churchill tanks are supposed to land first. They are supposed to suppress the bunkers. They are supposed to be the shield. But the schedule is broken. The infantry land before the tanks. They are naked, exposed on a beach that is 200 yards deep, 200 yards of open ground, heavily pre-sighted by snipers in the hotel windows. 07 hours. The reserve force arrives. Les Fusiliers Mont-Royal, 600 men from Montreal. They believe they are coming to reinforce a foothold. They believe the beach is secure. Instead, they drift into an abattoir. The Germans simply adjust their aim. The tide is turned against them in the literal sense. The boats run aground on sandbars. Men jump out thinking it is shallow and drop into 10 feet of water. Weighed down by ammunition and wet wool, many drown without ever firing a shot. Those who make it to the shore find no cover. They huddle behind the immobilized tanks or the bodies of their comrades. The chaos is absolute. While the soldiers die on the stones, a different battle is raging overhead. The Royal Air Force has come out in force. This was one of the secondary goals of the raid. Provoke the Luftwaffe into a fight. It becomes the single largest air battle of the entire war. Over 2,500 aircraft fill the sky. A swirling mosaic of metal and fire. But to the men on the beach, the air support is just noise. The planes cannot stop the mortars. They cannot silence the cliff guns. They can only watch the tragedy unfold from 10,000 feet. On 9 outer hours, the truth finally penetrates the fog of war. General Roberts realizes his mistake. The reserves are pinned, the tanks are stuck. The timeline is shattered. There will be no capture of the town. There will be no holding for a tide. The mission has failed. Now the objective changes. It is no longer about victory, it is about survival. He issues the order that every commander dreads. Vanquish, the code word for withdrawal, but leaving Dieppe will prove even harder than arriving. 11 a.m., the evacuation begins. The Germans see the retreat, and they unleash everything they have left. The landing craft braving the fire to return to the beach are manned by heroes. Royal Navy sailors steer their wooden boats directly into a wall of steel. But heroism is not enough against physics. Boats are blown out of the water. Engines fail, rudders shatter. For every man pulled from the water, 2 are left behind. At 12:20, the naval commander makes the call. No more boats. The fleet turns around. Silence begins to fall over the beach at Dieppe. The ammunition is gone. The hope is gone. One by one, the white flags appear. It is the largest mass surrender of Canadian troops in history. The Germans are stunned by the scale of their victory. They walk among the wreckage, taking photographs, collecting souvenirs. By nightfall, the telegrams reach London. The numbers are catastrophic. Of the 5,000 Canadians who landed, only 2,200 returned to England, and many of them are wounded in body and spirit. The raid lasted only 9 hours, but it decimated an entire generation of Canadian youth. The propaganda machine immediately spins into action. They call it a reconnaissance in force. They claim it was necessary, but as the years pass, and the history books are written, one question remains: was it a senseless waste, or was it the bloody price of D-Day? The afternoon of August 19, 1942, the remnants of the Armada limp back into the harbor at New Haven. Usually the return of a fleet is a moment of fanfare. Crowds gather, bands play, but today the docks are silent. The destroyers are riding high in the water. They are light, because they are empty. They left with 5,000 men. They return with ghosts. The psychological shock is immediate and devastating. In the mess halls of England, plates of food are set out for men who will never eat again. Entire platoons are missing. In some barracks, only the equipment is left. Neatly made beds, letters half written to mothers in Saskatchewan and wives in Toronto. The silence in those rooms is louder than the artillery on the beach. Within hours, the news travels across the Atlantic. It hits the small towns of Canada like a physical blow. Windsor, Hamilton, Winnipeg, Calgary, Montreal. The telegraph boys on bicycles become the harbingers of doom. Regret to inform you. Missing in action. Killed in action. For a country of Canada's size, the loss is staggering. Every community knows someone who was at Dieppe. The illusion of the war happening somewhere else is shattered. The blood of their sons has been painted onto the pebbles of a French resort town they had never heard of. While Canada weeps, Berlin celebrates. For Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi machine, Dieppe is a gift. They broadcast the footage of the burning tanks to the world. They show the long columns of dejected prisoners marching through the streets of Dieppe. They frame it not as a raid, but as a failed full-scale invasion. They mock the Allies. Is this the best you can do? Is this the second front you promised Stalin? For the 1,546 Canadians taken prisoner, the nightmare is just beginning. They are stripped of their weapons, their kit, and often their boots. They are loaded into cattle cars, packed tight, standing room only, sent east into the heart of the Reich. And then the humiliation deepens. In the chaos of the withdrawal, a copy of an Allied operational order fell into German hands. It contained instructions on how to tie up prisoners to prevent them from destroying documents. Hitler is enraged. He claims the Allies are violating the Geneva Convention. In retaliation, he issues the infamous shackling order. For months, Canadian prisoners are forced to wear chains and manacles. They eat with them, sleep with them. It is a petty, brutal act of vengeance by a dictator who feels invincible. In their twilight years, many returned to France. They walked on the chert beaches. They touched the concrete of the bunkers that had once tried to kill them. They found a town that honored them as heroes. To the people of Dieppe, the Canadians were not failures. They were the first light of freedom, the first signal that the world had not forgotten them. The story of Dieppe is a tragedy, yes, but it is also a story of resilience, of young men who walked into fire because they were asked to, of a nation that learned the hard way what it means to be a global power. The fatal mistake was made by the commanders. The glory belongs entirely to the men. They are the ghosts of the Pebble Beach, and as long as we remember them, they are not lost. 1943, the Combined Operations Headquarters. The mourning period is over. The analysis period begins. The Rudder Report analyzes the failure at Dieppe with forensic coldness. It strips away the heroism and looks at the physics of the defeat. and it produces a list of must-haves for the real invasion. Lesson 1. Firepower. Dieppe proved that surprise is a myth. You cannot sneak an army onto a continent. If you cannot use surprise, you must use brute force. The report concludes, no assault on a fortified coast is possible without overwhelming heavy naval bombardment. Destroyers are not enough. You need battleships. You need to turn the concrete bunkers into dust before the first boot hits the sand. Lesson 2. The terrain. The chert at Dieppe defeated the tanks. So, covert teams are sent to the beaches of Normandy. Under the cover of night, brave men swim ashore to take soil samples. They analyze the sand, the clay, the peat. They ensure that when the tanks return, they will not sink. Lesson 3. The armor. Standard tanks are useless against seawalls and pillboxes. Enter General Percy Hobart. He is tasked with designing the funnies, a bizarre menagerie of modified tanks designed to solve the specific problems that killed the Canadians at Dieppe. The bobbin tank, laying a carpet path over soft sand. The crab tank, flailing chains to detonate landmines. The crocodile tank, spewing liquid fire into bunkers. Every one of these inventions is a direct answer to a specific horror witnessed at Dieppe. If the Canadians had these in 1942, they might have lived. Because they died, the British built them for 1944. Lesson 4. The port. The Dieppe plan assumed they had to capture a port to offload supplies. But the Germans would just blow up the cranes and docks before retreating. So Churchill asks the impossible question, if we cannot capture a port, can we bring one with us? The result is the Mulberry Harbor. Massive artificial concrete harbors, built in pieces in England, towed across the Channel, and assembled off the beaches of Normandy. A feat of engineering that renders the German defense strategy obsolete. They don't need to attack the heavily defended harbors like Dieppe or Calais anymore. They can attack the empty beaches. June 6, 1944, D-Day. As the ramps drop on Juno Beach, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division storms ashore. But this time, the sky is filled with heavy bombers. The sea is filled with battleships pounding the coast. The tanks, Hobart's funnies, swim ashore and beat the infantry to the beach. They crush the wire, they bridge the walls. The Canadians penetrate further inland on D-Day than any other Allied force. They are driven by a ghost. They are fighting for the memory of the Royal Regiment, the Essex Scottish, the Fusiliers. Every step they take on French soil is paid for by a life lost 2 years earlier. September 1st, 1944, the 2nd Canadian Division returns to Dieppe. But this time there is no gunfire. The Germans have fled, terrified of being cut off. The Canadians liberate the town without firing a shot. They ride past the casino, past the seawall, past the beaches where their brothers died. It is a moment of profound, bittersweet victory. They hold a parade. Not a parade of prisoners like in 1942, but a parade of victors. Today the cemetery at Dieppe is quiet. The headstones face Canada. There are 944 of them here. Teenagers from the prairies, factory workers from Ontario. Lord Mountbatten later said, "I have no doubt that the Battle of Normandy was won on the beaches of Dieppe. For every man who died at Dieppe, at least 10 more were spared in Normandy." It is a cold calculus, a transaction of blood for knowledge, but in the brutal arithmetic of total war. The fatal mistake was not in vain. It was the necessary tragedy, the dress rehearsal for liberation, and the world we live in today is built on the stones of that beach. End of series. It was a test of endurance that stripped a man down to his very core. But they kept each other alive. They carried their wounded. They shared their last crusts of bread, because they were a regiment. Liberation, when it came, was a blur of chocolate, cigarettes, and tears. But the return home was not the fairy tale they expected. They brought the war home with them. In 1946, there was no word for PTSD. They called it battle exhaustion, or nerves. Men who had survived the beach and the camps found themselves waking up screaming in the night. They couldn't hold down jobs. They drank to drown the sound of the MG-42s. For decades, the Dieppe veterans were a unique brotherhood. They were the men who had seen the worst of it. They were often looked down upon by those who fought in the successful campaigns. They were the reminders of failure, but among themselves they knew the truth. They knew the price they had paid. In their twilight years, many returned to France. They walked on the chert beaches. They touched the concrete of the bunkers that had once tried to kill them. They found a town that honored them as heroes. To the people of Dieppe, the Canadians were not failures. They were the first light of freedom, the first signal that the world had not forgotten them. The story of Dieppe is a tragedy, yes, But it is also a story of resilience, of young men who walked into fire because they were asked to, of a nation that learned the hard way what it means to be a global power. The fatal mistake was made by the commanders. The glory belongs entirely to the men. They are the ghosts of the Pebble Beach, and as long as we remember them, they are not lost. For the survivors of the beach, the battle ended at 1 p.m. on August 19th. But the war was far from over. Nearly 2,000 Canadians were marched into captivity. They were the men of Dieppe. For 3 long years, they existed in the twilight world of the stalags. Stalag 8B, Lambsdorff, a place of barbed wire, turnip soup, and boredom. They were shackled. They were starved. But they were not broken. The Dieppe prisoners became legendary for their resistance. They dug tunnels. They sabotaged work details. They traded cigarettes for radio parts to listen to the BBC. They held on to the hope that one day the tables would turn. That day finally came in 1945, but it came with a final test. As the Soviet Red Army smashed through Poland, the Germans panicked. They emptied the POW camps. They forced the prisoners to march west, away from the liberators. The Death March, in the dead of winter, 1945. For months, the men of Dieppe marched across Germany. They slept in barns, in ditches, in the snow. They ate frozen potatoes they dug from the fields. Those who fell out of line were shot. Those who couldn't walk were left behind. The official narrative of Dieppe is one of tragedy and tactical lessons. But for decades, a shadow lay over the files in the British archives. Documents marked most secret, pages ripped out of war diaries, testimonies silenced, because behind the slaughter of the Canadian infantry, there was another operation taking place. A mission so sensitive that its failure had to be buried under the bodies of 5,000 men. We return to Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming. Before he created the world's most famous fictional spy, he was the assistant to the Director of Naval Intelligence. And he was obsessed with one thing, the German naval enigma. In early 1942, the Nazis had introduced the 4-rotor Enigma machine, codenamed Triton. It had blinded the code breakers at Bletchley Park. The Allies were losing the Battle of the Atlantic. They were blind. Fleming proposed a radical solution. If we can't crack the code, we must steal the machine. Intelligence reports indicated that the German naval headquarters in Dieppe was housed in the Hotel Moderne. Inside that hotel was a safe, and inside that safe, the holy grail of intelligence. This was the mission of the 30 Assault Unit, Fleming's private army. They were not there to liberate France. They were not there to destroy batteries. They were the pinch team. Their orders were explicit. Get into the hotel. Kill the occupants, steal the code books and the rotors. Get out. This theory, now supported by declassified documents, reframes the entire battle. It suggests that the frontal assault by the Canadians, the tanks, the air battle, all of it was a diversion in force. A massive, bloody distraction designed to draw every German eye toward the beach, so that Fleming's unit could slip into the town unnoticed. The tragedy is that the diversion worked, but the pinch failed. The 30 Assault Unit never reached the Hotel Moderne. The street fighting was too intense. The German defense was too deep. They were forced to turn back. When the fleet returned to England, the cover-up began immediately. If the Germans knew the Allies were hunting for Enigma, they would change their codes again. So the pinch mission was erased from the records. The presence of Fleming's unit was scrubbed. This left the commanders like General Roberts with no defense. They couldn't say, "We were trying to steal a code machine." They had to accept the public narrative that they had planned a bad raid. They had to take the blame for incompetence to protect the secret. The Canadian government was furious. Prime Minister Mackenzie King felt betrayed by Churchill. He demanded answers, but he was given stonewalled silence. Lord Mountbatten, the man at the top, was a master of public relations. He knew that careers are destroyed by failure, so he rewrote the story. He shifted the focus to the air victory. He emphasized the lessons learned. He effectively argued that the Canadian blood spilled at Dieppe was the tuition fee for D-Day. But for the families of the dead, lessons learned was a cold comfort. They didn't want lessons. They wanted their sons. The political fallout created a rift between Canada and Britain that lasted for years. It taught the Canadian military a hard lesson of their own. Never again would they allow their troops to be used as pawns in a British game without full control. The secret of the Enigma pinch remained buried for decades. Only recently have historians pieced together the clues. It adds a layer of bitter irony to the disaster. The men on the beach died to protect a secret that they were never told. They were the ultimate decoys,